Hello everyone, welcome to Drishti IAS. You're watching the NCERT Foundation Series, and as always we are covering the subject of political science or polity with the help of MCQs and PYQs wherever relevant. So without further ado, let's plunge right in. Today we are going to be covering chapter 4 of your class 11 NCERT, and the chapter is titled Executive. So you know there are three organs of the government: the legislature, the executive and the judiciary, and today we are going to be covering this part of the government. Now in today's video, we are going to be covering the forms of executive, the parliamentary, presidential and the semi-presidential, as well as a bit about political and permanent executive. The reason why I am limiting myself to only a couple of topics over here is because you do not want to be bombarded with a lot of information, and we are focusing on conceptual clarity. Now the rest of it we are going to be covering in subsequent videos. Let's shift our focus to the previous day question. How many delimitation commissions have been constituted by the Government of India till December 2023? This was a PYQ and a lot of you answered correctly in the comments. The correct answer is option 4. Now the first delimitation commission was constituted in 1952 to redraw or to draw the boundaries for our first general elections. After the 1951 census, under the Delimitation Commission Act of 1952, this was followed by another one in 1963 under the Delimitation Act of 1962, and of course it was based on 1961 census. The one after that was constituted or set up in 1973 under the Delimitation Commission Act of 1972 based on the 1971 census, and finally the fourth one was constituted in 2002 based on the 2001 census, and it was set up under the Delimitation Commission Act of 2002. So now it is important to note that a separate delimitation commission was also set up in 2020 for the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir after the changes in Article 370, and this commission was set up under the J&K Reorganization Act of 2019. It was set up under the J&K Reorganization Act of 2019. However, this is not counted as a separate delimitation commission because it was very region specific. So this brings us to our correct answer, which most of you got in the comments. Option D, 4 delimitation commissions so far. Now let's move on to what we are focusing on in today's video, which is the topic of the executive. Now in India, the term executive refers to, let's first try and understand that when we are talking about the executive, we are actually referring to one of the three organs of the government, namely the legislature, the executive and the judiciary. Now in very simple terms, what is the function of the legislative or the legislature? It is to formulate laws, to frame laws and policies. So formulation and adoption of laws is the function of our legislature. Laws and policies. Judiciary has to do with interpreting of the constitution. Interpreting of the constitution, as well as resolution of disputes, right? So judiciary has to do with, of course, interpreting the constitution as well as dispute resolution. What can the disputes be between, or whom can the disputes be between? It could be between the center and the states, different states, the state with a capital S, and the citizen, right? So this is what these two organs do. What does executive do? Executive has to do with implementation of all those laws and policies that are adopted by the legislature. So your executive has to do with implementing those laws. Now, what constitutes the executive? Of course, the heads of the government. Heads of government do constitute the executive. This may include your president, your prime minister, your different ministers, but it also extends to the administrative machinery. The administrative machinery, which includes your civil servants, your bureaucrats. Now, these civil servants, the bureaucrats, your administrative machinery, which are concerned with the day-to-day functions or the day-to-day implementations, are called the permanent executive, whereas the heads of the government, who are basically concerned with the overall holistic policy picture, are called as political executive. So, in the light of this information, let's try and solve the problem. A says the president only. No, we know that it concerns heads of the government as well as various permanent executives as well. Option B says the prime minister and council of ministers only. No, so this gives a very incomplete picture. Option C says the body responsible for implementation of laws and policies. Absolutely, the entire body consisting of your political as well as permanent executive. Option D says the judiciary and the legislature collectively. No, absolutely not, and this seems to be like a very obvious wrong option that can be eliminated. So with this, we come to our correct answer, which is option number C. I hope that is clear. Which of the following correctly distinguishes a presidential system from a parliamentary system of government? Now, we all know that India follows a parliamentary, or India has adopted a parliamentary system of government where the executive is responsible to the legislature. Now, let's try and understand what are the different systems of government that are available, all right, or that are prevalent around the world. Let's begin with the presidential system. Now, when we talk about the presidential system, let's think of countries like USA. So we know that, for example, Donald Trump is the current president. He's the head of the state as well as the head of the government. You know how he is the final decision maker over there, and that he was elected by the people directly. All right. So we need to know what are the few things that we need to keep in mind. Firstly, that the president in this form of the government, in the presidential form of the government, the president is the head of state. He is also the head of government. So the president is head of the state and head of the government. This is something that we should be absolutely clear with the moment we read the presidential form of government. Other than this, what we need to know is that the president is elected directly by the people. The president is elected directly by the people. The third thing that you ought to know is the president is not responsible to the legislature in the presidential form of government or the presidential system of government. So these are a few things that we ought to remember. What are the examples of this form of government? The examples are USA, Brazil, and quite a few countries of Latin America. Moving on to the other form, which is more familiar to us because we have adopted that form of government, which is the parliamentary system of government. So let's move on to parliamentary system of government. Here, head of the state is not the prime minister, but head of the government is the prime minister. So in the parliamentary form of government, the head of the state is not necessarily a president, but the head of the government is a prime minister. So prime minister is head of government. Who is the head of state? We'll come back to that. Now, the prime minister is basically the leader of the largest party in the legislature. So, the prime minister is the leader of the largest party in the parliament. And of course, the prime minister and his council of ministers are responsible to the Lok Sabha. Let's say responsible to the legislature. Right? Now the head of the government is prime minister, but the head of state could be president, or it could be a monarch. When the head of the state is a president, we say that it is a democratic republic. Whereas when the head of the state is a monarch, we say that it is a constitutional monarchy. Both are forms of parliamentary democracies, but in the case of a president, in the case of the president being the head of the state, the form of government becomes a democratic republic, whereas if the monarch is the head of the state, it becomes a constitutional monarchy. Now, there's also a third type that has been mentioned in your book that I'll draw your attention to, and that is your semi-presidential form of government. What are the examples of parliamentary forms of government? Very simple. India, UK, Japan. You can even count Germany here. In Germany, the prime minister is replaced by the chancellor, and of course, there's also a head of state, which is president. Now, in the semi-presidential system of government, as the name suggests, it incorporates features of both the presidential as well as the parliamentary systems of government. Now, let's take a quick look at what the features are. So, here, president is the head of state. President is indeed the head of state. Also, the president is elected directly by the people, just like in the US. So, the president is elected directly by the people. Now, like the parliamentary form of government, it also has a prime minister and the council of ministers. So, there is a prime minister along with his or her council of ministers. Are they responsible to the legislature? Yes, they are responsible to the legislature. Is the president responsible to the legislature? No, the president is not responsible to the legislature. So, even though the prime minister is the head of the government, the powers are really shared between the president as well as the prime minister. Now, based on this information, anyway, but before that, let me tell you that this system is present in Sri Lanka, Russia, and even France. So based on this information, let's try and attempt what differentiates a presidential system from a parliamentary one. So the option A says the executive is directly elected by the people and is not accountable to the legislature. When we were reading about or when we were discussing the presidential form of government, this is indeed what we discussed, and hence this is the correct answer. Option B says the executive is collectively responsible to the legislature and can be removed by it through a no confidence motion. This is very much symptomatic of a parliamentary form of government. Option C says the executive and legislature are closely interlinked. Ministers are part of the legislature. Also symptomatic of or very descriptive of parliamentary form. Option D says the head of state and head of government are two different persons. So this is not true of the presidential form. This is true of the parliamentary form, and to some extent even the semi-presidential form, whereas when we talk about the presidential system, the very first thing that we discussed was that the head of the state and the head of the government are the same person, that is the president. So we have option A as our correct answer. Now, the next question is again a PYQ from 2015. And you'll notice while you're reading this chapter, and I hope you're going back and reading this chapter or whatever chapter we are discussing, because without that, this feels very incomplete or rather insufficient. Although this does cover up your entire portion, this will also indicate how and why NCERTs are so helpful for your preparation, because again, this has been lifted as it is from your NCERT chapter. So this should explain to you why NCERTs are as important as they are. So there is a parliamentary system of government in India because, and there are four options in front of you. Option A says Lok Sabha is elected directly by the people. No, this is not really a feature of parliamentary system of, it is, but this is not the reason that we say that India has a parliamentary system of government. We know that in the parliamentary system of government, the Prime Minister and his Council of Ministers are responsible collectively to the Lok Sabha, right? So this is not the reason why it is considered a parliamentary form of government. Parliament can amend the constitution. Again, this is not a reason for why this system is considered as a parliamentary form of government. Option C says Rajya Sabha cannot be dissolved. While this is a feature of the Indian parliamentary system, this is not the feature, the essential feature that actually makes it the reason it is the parliamentary system. Option D says Council of Ministers is responsible to the Lok Sabha, and this in fact is the primary or the essential reason why we have a parliamentary system in India. This was also envisioned or foreseen by our founding fathers of the constitution, wherein they realized that in order for people's aspirations and needs to be met, the executive had to be vested with strong powers, but they also had to be responsible and accountable to the people, and this would so happen by their collective responsibility to the Lok Sabha, which is indeed elected directly by the people. So they are in a way answerable directly to the people. This was the whole idea behind adopting the parliamentary form of system, and this gives us a correct answer, which is option D. The next question says India adopted a parliamentary executive mainly to. Why did India adopt a parliamentary executive? What was the need? What was the vision of our founding fathers? So of course, one thing, and mostly the most important thing rather, is something that we've discussed in the preceding question, that the constitution makers realized that in order to fulfill the aspirations of the people, the need and aspirations of the people, it was necessary that the executive be strong, but it was more necessary, it was more important that the executive be responsible to the people, responsible to the legislature. However, there was another reason, and that was that India had some prior experience with the parliamentary form of system in the form of the Government of India Act 1919 and the Government of India Act 1935. So we also had this experience of adopting or dealing with a parliamentary form of government. There was a third and a very, very important reason, and that was the fact that the Constituent Assembly, the constitution makers, were actually also considering the presidential form of government for India. But they realized that even though it provides more stability by vesting most of the power with the president, so the presidential form of government is likely to provide more stability in that sense. However, what is very likely is that there going to be a following of personality cult, right? So there'll be a following of personality cult over here. A single person with a lot of supporters is going to definitely win the elections, and especially if that person is not responsible to the legislature, does not necessarily reflect the aspirations of the people, like that, does not really hold accountability in the sense that parliamentary democracy does. So this was one reason that they really did not want. The reason was, of course, to avoid some sort of a concentration of power or following a hero worship sort of a thing, a personality cult sort of a thing. So in order to avoid this, of course, this was also among these reasons that the parliamentary system was adopted in place of the presidential system. Of course, this system was also considered while the Constituent Assembly sat for its sessions. So here, of course, we have option B as our correct answer, to avoid concentration of power in one individual. I hope this is clear to you. The next question says, which of the following correctly distinguishes between political and permanent executive? So we've already discussed the difference between the two. Political executive refers to the various heads of government. Of course, this involves your president, your prime minister, the council of ministers, and when it comes to states, it includes governor, the chief ministers, and their respective council of ministers. This is your political executive. But what happens? The governments come and go. The governments keep changing. Therefore, the political executive also keeps changing. What remains intact or what stays as it is the administrative machinery, the bureaucrats, the civil servants, and hence they are known as permanent executive. All right, because the government changes, comes and goes. Sometimes there's one political party, sometimes there's another, and hence the requirement of neutrality is very crucial from permanent executive, and you may have also read about it in your paper 4 ethics, where non-partisanship as well as political neutrality is expected from your permanent executives. So option A says political executive is permanent while the other changes with elections. This is indeed wrong. Option B says political executive implements laws and permanent executive makes policies. This actually should be reversed. It's the other way around. Option C says political executive changes with elections while permanent executive remains in office. This is correct. Whereas option D says both are elected by the people. No, only the political executive is elected by the people. So we have option C as your correct answer. Now this also happens to be a PYQ. So in the context of India, which one of the following is the characteristic appropriate for bureaucracy? When we talk about bureaucracy, we are referring to permanent executive. And they have to do with, of course, implementing of policies, right, formulated by the political executive. So let's see. Option A says an agency for widening the scope of parliamentary democracy. Not necessarily. This doesn't seem to make sense. Option B says an agency for strengthening the structure of federalism. So see, federalism, as we discussed in previous lectures, has to do with vertical division of powers between center and states. This really does not have to do with bureaucracy so much, at least not directly. So this we will rule out. Now option C says an agency for facilitating political stability and economic growth. No, not really. We are talking about implementation of policies, and while it is a necessary condition for political stability as well as economic growth, it does not necessarily enable those things. So while this might appear like a tempting option, it's not correct. Option D says an agency for the implementation of public policy, and this is our correct answer, which is option number D over here. So this is your practice question, and this is about the President of India. Kindly take a look at it. Now in the subsequent videos, we'll be starting with this the question on president, this practice question, and we'll be focusing more on the topic of the president as well as the prime minister, the vice president, followed by the political and permanent executive. So this is the portion that is going to be a segue to our next video or the next topic of discussion in the upcoming video. So do send me your answers in the comment section. We'll begin from here. If you liked today's session, if you found it useful, fruitful in any way, kindly like, share and subscribe, and also send me your answers in the comment section. Thanks for watching.
For more informative content, like, share and subscribe, and do not forget to press the bell icon to get the notifications.